Three. Hi, my name is Lubi Barre, and welcome to SuedLese 2021. I'm a writer, curator, and moderator living in Hamburg. Since I moved here 8 years ago, I noticed that there was a lack of readings and events for authors and artists writing in languages other than German. And since then, I've dedicated myself to deliberately diversifying these fields by curating authors who are not given spaces in this city to perform and do their art. So this reading series was inspired by that. It is called Sprachlos. We celebrate authors who write in a language other than German, who often feel speechless at the lack of opportunities to publish, read, and share their work in their native tongue. Readings will be in English and in Arabic. We have 4 authors for you this evening. Ghayath Almadhoun is a Palestinian poet born in Damascus in 1979 and lived in Stockholm since 2008. He writes in Arabic and has published 4 poetry books, the latest Adrenaline in 2017. His work, translated into many languages, has been part of many artists' works. For example, the renowned Jenny Holzer has projected his poetry in Denmark, USA, and Italy. And the legendary artist Blixa Bargeld has read loudly his poems in Norway and Greece. He was an artist in residence at DAAD Artists-in-Berlin program last year and has since been living in Berlin. Katerina Vasiliou is a British author based in Hamburg. She won a Scottish New Writers Award in 2010, and since then she has written short stories, collaborated with a Romanian visual artist on an art text project, and is currently working on a memoir about growing up in a Greek Cypriot family in the aftermath of the 1974 invasion. Elnathan John is a Nigerian lawyer, novelist, and satirist. His short stories have been shortlisted twice for the Caine Prize for African Writing in 2013 and 2015. His novel, Born on a Tuesday, won a Betty Trask Award and was shortlisted for the Nigeria Prize for Literature. It has been translated into German and French, and the French edition won the Prix Les Afriques in 2019. His most recent book, a satire collection, Becoming a Nigerian, a Guide, was published by Cassava Republic Press in 2019. On a J. Crowther Street, his graphic novel was published in November 2019. Elnathan was on the jury of the 2019 Man Booker International Prize. He lives in Berlin and is a 2019 recipient of the Berlin Senat Grant for Non-German Literature. Esther Kondo is a poet, writer, and experimental poetry filmmaker. They were the Barbican Young Poet in 2018 and 2019. They recently graduated with an undergraduate diploma in creative writing from the University of Oxford and have performed their poetry amongst other places at the Roundhouse APT Gallery and the Barbican. I'm so happy to be able to present these writers at the SuedLese, and I hope you find perspective and inspiration in their words as much as I have.
لو كنا في عالم افتراضي واحد. انتهت الحرب. لقد انتهت الحرب، لكن القنابل لا زالت تتساقط داخل رأسي. لو كنا في عالم افتراضي لكنت مسحت زجاج النافذة المطلة على بيتك بجريدة إلكترونية، ولنمت الوردة البلاستيكية التي وضعتها على قبر أخي. انتهت الحرب، والأصدقاء الذين ذهبوا إلى السوق كي يشتروا موتا طازجا قتلوا في الطريق. لو كنا في عالم افتراضي لكنت أعدت تدوير أصدقائي، فأنا بحاجة لأصدقاء مستعملين. انتهت الحرب وعاد القتلى إلى أهلهم سالمين، عاد الشهداء إلى أمهاتهم كاملين، عادت الأمهات إلى البيوت، عادت البيوت، الشوارع، الجوامع، الأعين، الأقدام، الأشلاء إلى أصحابها، عادت الأصابع إلى الأيادي، الخواتم إلى الأصابع، المدارس إلى الأطفال، عادت حبال الغسيل إلى الشرفات، العشاق إلى الأساطيح، أخي إلى أمي، وأنا عدت إلى الشام. لو كنا في عالم افتراضي لنسيت أن أتذكر الحرب، ولتذكرت أن أنساها كما ينسى القتلى ملامح الجنرال، وكما يتذكر الشهداء الطريق إلى البيت. انتهت الحرب وأصبح جميع من عرفتهم ميتين، أو مجرمي حرب، أو مجرمي حرب ميتين. لو كنا في عالم افتراضي لأطفأت الحرب كما تطفئين التلفزيون، ولكننا ولدنا في عالم ابن عاهرة، وحين يولد الناس في عالم ابن عاهرة يتحول الزمن إلى آلة كاتبة، والقتلى إلى قصائد. هامش كوميدي. تكمن عبقرية دانتي في الليمبو، تأملها قليلا وستدرك فورا أننا نعيش في أولى طبقات الجحيم. قطع. ثانيا، الحرب. حاولت أن أترجم لك الحرب من لغة سامية إلى لغة هندو-أوروبية، فأصابتك الشظايا. حاولت أن أسعفك، فحاصرتنا نشرة الأخبار. حاول مجلس الأمن أن يرسل لنا أسلحة ذكية، فصادرها رجال أمن متوسطو الذكاء. شتمنا الصليب الأحمر، فاعترض الفاتيكان. أكلنا لحم كلاب منزلية قتل أصحابها، فاعترض أنصار البيئة. نجونا من الغرق، فاعترض اليمين الأوروبي. كيف يمكن أن أصف لك كم يشبه هذا العالم ضربات الأيدي الهزيلة على الجدران السميكة لغرف الغاز في معسكرات الاعتقال، دون أن تصابي باضطرابات ما بعد الصدمة؟ كيف يمكن أن أشرح لك الفرق بين عبيد المنزل وعبيد الحقل، دون أن تختلط عليك سوريا والسوريالية؟ كيف يمكن أن أقول في قصيدة واحدة: قتل أصدقائي تحت التعذيب وأنت أجمل من نيويورك، دون أن يضحك لوركا في قبره أو ينفصل الشعر عن الواقع؟ هامش تراجيدي. ليست مشكلة هذا العالم أن ربع سكانه يذهبون إلى عيادات الأطباء النفسيين، المشكلة أن الباقين لا يذهبون. قطع. ثالثا، شطرنج. عندما مرت الريح لم تجد الشجرة، وكانت الفأس تنظر نحوي وأنا ضائع في الترجمة، هادئ مثل وقف إطلاق النار، عالق في كوكب أزرق، في ضاحية نائية من مجرة درب التبانة. رأيت غزالة تفترس ذئبا، وكان الدم ينقط من أسنانها. رأيت نساء عواقر يرضعن أجنة ولدوا ميتين. رأيت ذبابا إلكترونيا يخرج من تويتر ويحوم حول جثث أصدقائي. رأيت بلدا يركب في قارب صيد، ورجلا يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا، ليس مجازا كما ورد في القرآن، إنما رجلا يأكل جثة أخيه الذي قتل في القصف كي لا يموت جوعا. مرت الريح ولم تجد الشجرة، لم تجد المدينة، لم تجد البلاد، لا الكلاب كانت تعوي ولا القافلة تسير، زوجتي الأرملة تنظر نحوي، فالحرب نظيفة وكأنها شطرنج. أسعار براميل النفط تصعد وبراميل الTNT تهبط على المدن، والطائرات تلحس الكتب المدرسية وترضع أصابع الأطفال، وأنا صامت مثل مواطن أوروبي يتمتع بامتيازات العالم الأول ويتساءل ببراءة ذئب منزلي: أيهما أصعب، الشتاء السويدي أم الربيع العربي؟ هامش عبثي. النيويورك تايمز تقول إن الحليب أبيض. بول سيلان يقول إن الحليب أسود. أمي تقول لا يوجد حليب. قطع. رابعا، مجاز من عالم افتراضي. كان دانتي على حق. إن هذه الكوميديا التي نعيشها إلهية. أو لكي نكون منصفين فلنقل إنها إلهية بنسبة 97% على الأقل، وإلا كيف تفسرين أن كل ما حولنا يشبه مجازا خارجا من عالم افتراضي؟ الأزهار تمارسه الجنس عن طريق النحل. أدولف هتلر كان نباتيا. نحن سعداء لأن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية لم ترمي القنبلة الذرية على طوكيو. المؤيدون للدكتاتور يخرجون بمظاهرة تطالب بمنع التظاهر. أنا أحبك. الله يبيع الأراضي المليئة بالحليب والعسل. فنلندا أسعد بلد في العالم حسب تقرير السعادة العالمية. الصليب الذي تضعينه في عنقك ما هو إلا آلة تعذيب رومانية. هامش تراجي كوميدي. بما أن الجميع سوف يموت في النهاية، فإن نسبة الموت في سوريا والسويد 1. قطع.
Hello, I'm Katerina Vasiliou. I'm a British writer based in Hamburg, and I'm really pleased to be taking part of this festival, even if it has to be digitally this time. As we are celebrating Hamburg, I thought I would like to read something about Hamburg. When I moved here 7 years ago, I didn't speak a word of German, and I didn't know a single thing about the city, nothing. So I started reading a bit about the history, and one of the things that interested me was the British invasion in the 60s of the groups that, including the Beatles, that came to the Reeperbahn. I thought that was a very interesting connection between the UK and between Hamburg, and especially because a lot of those people will have grown up during the Second World War, and then 15 years later they're in a country that they'd heard so many negative things about growing up. So I wrote a short story called Horses, about a British young woman who leaves her life in the north of England to follow a young man and his band as they are playing in Hamburg. Okay, so I'm just going to read the first part of the story. So, Joan looked down at the cowpat on the plate with a fried egg on top. Hamburg breakfast. Coffee rings stained the formica table. Smudges in square outlines detailed where paintings may have hung on the bare walls. A grid of tables, each with its lone man, cigarette smoke marking his territory. I'll have it if you don't want it, Tony said from across. She looked up and realised he'd said this once already, and she pushed the plate across the table. Yeah, I'm just feeling a bit dodgy from the boat trip, you know. She smiled weakly. Tony nodded and began to tuck into the boiled meat without a word. Her husband Len would have made such a fuss of it. Go on, just try a bit. Go on, try it, just a bit. Go on, don't turn your nose up at it. I've spent money on that now. Go on, try it, try it, try it. And Joan would reply that she never asked him to buy it, and then they would start bickering again, picking at each other's scabs. Tony looked ashen, even in the dark cafe, and his brown polo neck bore a couple of crusty stains. He said they'd been playing at the club until 6 a.m. And this is what you left for? Joan could hear her mother's disapproving voice at the back of her mind. Yes, actually, Mum. Once they went out, Tony walked Joan over to her digs. She had thought that they would be sharing a place now, but Tony explained that the opportunity had come up and it was much easier than having to deal with some landlord who didn't speak English. What about you? She asked. I'm in bunk beds with the boys above the club. He flashed a smile. It's a shithole. But Tina's place is cool. You'll have your own room, and she said I can come over whenever. She's cool, is Tina, don't worry, and the kid's at school for most of the day. There's a kid. Joan stopped in the street for a second and then shrugged. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I just didn't know. In coming here, she hadn't allowed herself any expectation, and he had offered no promises. All he had given her was a ticket and the unknown, the blissful unknown. They turned onto a residential street. The buildings were much older than she'd expected. Tall tenements with decorative elements, pillars, arches, stucco work above the window. Used to 2 up, 2 down terraces, she'd never seen such imposing homes for working people. But they were dilapidated, peeling plaster and dirty, as if the good folk had left long ago. She'd heard that Hamburg had been flattened during the war. On the boat, her imagination drew a city with big empty spaces and mounds of rubble. Something like Liverpool, she supposed. But not cobbled streets, not Victorian tenements that had seen better days. Tony stopped in front of a building, painted a faded, muddy red, but much of the colour had flaked off. She was glad it wasn't posh. She would have been embarrassed about the battered suitcase that her mother had found in a skip 2 weeks before her wedding. Tina! Tony shouted up into the air and made Joan jump. The bell's not working, he explained at a civilized volume, and then he shouted up again. Tina! A blonde head of curls thrust itself out of an open window on the second floor. Joan's eyes were drawn to the cleavage pressed up against the crossed forearms on the windowsill. I'll come and let you in, the woman called down in English, and her head slid under the sash. The door opened, and Albertina stood there, in curlers, peach-coloured slip, and stockings. Joan and Tony came up the steps, and Tina shook Joan's hand. She was older than Joan and heavy-set. She had thick kohl rimming her eyes in wings and blue eyeshadow lining her deep sockets. Joan noticed that Tony introduced them with their Christian names. In England, he would have said, "This is my friend, Mrs. Henshaw, and this is Mrs. So-and-so, something German," and then they would have all pretended. But Tina worked in the club where Tony's band performed, and although she should perhaps feel threatened by the slip and the cleavage, Joan found herself liking Tina immediately. There was no pretense in a woman who didn't bother to get dressed to answer the door. The kid was waiting for them in the hall of the flat. She looked about 10 or 11 years old, gangly legs under a blue smock dress and the same large features as her mother, except that her hair was mousy. Tina breezed past her and took them into a small bedroom dominated by an iron bedstead. She switched on the electric light, and Joan saw that a chest of drawers was the only other piece of furniture. A strip of velvet was knotted over a tiny slit of a window. It was a dark room, but it was clean. "I'm sorry about the window," Tina indicated. "But who needs light for sleeping, right?" It's lovely," said Joan, and she felt it to be true. It was a room with no imprint and no history. "You speak like Tony," Tina laughed. "Also from Lancashire?" "Lancashire," Tony said, putting the case on the eiderdown and sitting beside it. He looked worn out. "You will excuse my English, John. I've not been practicing for many years." As Tina spoke, one of her curlers flopped down over her eye, having worked itself loose. She yanked at it sharply, and it fell to the floor, leaving a golden spring behind. The kid darted in to pick it up. "Don't worry about your English, it's fine. It's better than my German. I can only say Auf Wiedersehen," said Joan. "We'll teach you, John. Yetta and me will teach you." Tina indicated the kid. "She can't understand what we're saying, that is why her face has anger." As if on cue, the girl glared up at them. "I was so happy when Tony told me that his girl was coming to Hamburg. You need a place to sleep? I need a girl sleeper." Tina's face changed to mock serious. "No more boy sleepers, Joan. I tell you later. You must learn German, and Jetta must learn English." She turned to Jetta and nodded severely. "Ja, Jetta, du musst." Her father was English, a soldier. "She has Papa's English hair, oder? Okay, we leave you. Here are your keys." The kid was pushed out of the room, and the door was closed before Joan or Tony could say anything. Joan was used to talkers. Her mother and Lisa were talkers. Tony pulled on her hand, and she sat down beside him on the bed. She inspected her skirt, and Tony inspected the floor. It was their old habit, a semi-denial of what they were doing in lip service to a guilt that they hardly felt. However, now that the bridle was off, it was somehow more awkward between them, not less. Neither of them moved for a moment. Joan had no expectations. She had come for no one but herself. "I'm dead tired, love," said Tony, and his arm went around her shoulder, and they lay back on the mattress together, with their feet still on the floor. "It's all right. There's the kid anyway." "Oh, don't worry about her. I think she's used to it." They paused and listened as the music started up in the other room, loud, brassy, band leader stuff. You see, Tina knows what to do. Joan felt a little bit uncomfortable with this kind of accommodating behaviour. It placed an expectation on her and made her look a little bit cheap. Although that's what she was, she supposed. She should let go of the idea of respectability. She'd ceased to be able to call herself respectable months ago. Tony was asleep in seconds, and Joan lay looking up at the ceiling, feeling more awake than she had in years. By now, her mother-in-law would be passing it over the hedges, declaring this and that to all and sundry. After all they had done for that ungrateful slag. Family know better than it ought to be. It's in the genes, I tell you it is. And I never trusted that slag. I just kept quiet for the sake of my boy. Well, I know better now. Joan's husband, Len, and all his brothers, downing pints and swearing vengeance. There would be dog shit through her mother's letterbox. But her mother would be keeping silent with folded arms, but thinking, "Stupid, stupid girl." And her sister Lisa thinking that her own upcoming wedding would now be spoiled. Selfish cow. Those two would be going around with their collars up, eyes on the ground, waiting it out until it was someone else's turn to be whispered about. Joan turned to Tony. Did he dream of drumming in his sleep? Now he'd asked her to come to Hamburg and she'd told him to get lost. They were just having a bit of fun. It wasn't serious. She wasn't about to leave for just that. And then she'd heard them play. She'd heard them play at a local gig, and when Len, her husband, had asked why she was all dressed to go out, Joan hadn't needed to lie. Her sister Lisa's fiancé's cousin's band were on the same bill as Tony's that night, and all she had to say was, "Our Lisa wants me to show my face down the Roxy." Len had caught her wrist as Joan had shovelled his dinner onto his plate. "My night shifts are coming to an end tomorrow. You know that. There'll be no more going out." When she had heard the music in the crowd, it was like 4 a.m. Elvis revving the engine of a tin drum racing car. Tony's face was glistening at the back, looking at nothing while he beat out the future. Ash falling on skins. He sent the rhythm out through the floorboards, through vibrating brass straps. She'd never heard anything like it. It was relentless, and she was running barefoot down a long road, going further with each slap of her soul. 9 years ago, Joan's father had gone out for a drink and had never come back. Her mother had kept the pretense to herself for almost a week after he'd gone. Joan and Lisa's questions were put down with a sharp, "He'll be back soon," until the police had said that they could find no trace of him. Joan saw her dad in the mirror all the time, in her flat face and her black hair. It had been 9 years, but she could still superimpose him onto her reflection. She thought of her dad in his armchair in the evenings, staring into the gas fire, fingers playing with his lit cigarette, while his daughters folded washing on the rug at his feet. Had he been plotting? Would people think that about her now? She hadn't been away with the fairies. The little slag had been plotting. But Joan hadn't abandoned 2 children, and she'd left Len a note. She would write to her mother. She would keep in touch. This wasn't a disappearance. This was a change of direction. Thank you.
My name is Elnathan John, and I'm reading We Are All Fine. My grandfather pulls out his penis and attempts to aim. His hands tremble, but he needs to find the right angle so he doesn't mess up the hospital toilet seat like he did yesterday. This is the one thing he will not let me help him do. And he will not sit to pee, he says. Once I sit to pee, he grunts, you might as well kill me. Just stop feeding me until I die. I prepare myself to wipe when he finishes. I stand behind him at a distance that provides the illusion of privacy while allowing me to be there as soon as something goes wrong. He sighs as he waits for the trickle. I bite my inner cheeks as I wait for it. Yesterday, we went 3 times before I heard the first few drops. The sigh is new. I know his groan. I know his grunt. I know, at least from what my uncles tell me, his screams, the projectiles from his mouth, quickly chased by words none of them could repeat to me. More than all of his grandchildren, I look most like him. I have his limbs and his lips. I have his gleaming dark skin. I have his dry hands and feet which need to be frequently moisturized. I wonder what else of his I have. I wonder, did he grow into this, successfully keeping all the demons at bay until he capitulated in middle age and left these sad memories in the minds of his children? The groan resumes, the one just before the trickle when it is hardest. I stop biting my cheeks and listen for it. There will be success today in the face of all of his failure, of his heart, of his kidneys, of his spirit. He reaches behind him to hold something for balance. He will not ask for help. I spring toward him, catching his frail hands, which are now flailing. When his hand touches mine, he pauses, almost as if he wants to push it away, but he holds on to it instead. I hold on and use my other hand to turn him around. His lips are bunched, and he avoids my eyes as he shuffles slowly, painfully. I feel his stomach tremble and the tips of his fingers cold. I cover his body with a thick blanket, propping his head with a pillow before I feed him some warm soup. His fingers are shorter than they used to be when I was a 9-year-old running around in his compound and he would wave me from the well that always fascinated me. Or at least they seem shorter. I used to try to go as close as possible to see my reflection in the water. I wondered then how many days or weeks it took and how many men to dig and scrape out earth until they found water down below. The few times I was able to look properly when he had fallen asleep, I saw that there were holes in the cylindrical wall of the well, perhaps for the diggers to climb out. Perhaps it was possible to climb in the same way the last man climbed out. Was it cold down there? Would I hear my heartbeat bounce against the walls? Then one day, my mother told me how a little boy drowned in a well inside his home a few streets from us, and I became too afraid to go close. I placed some kitchen rolls around his neck. I tip spoonfuls of soup into his lips so that when it spills, I can wipe before it stains the sheets or his shirt. After the second spoon, he bunches his mouth again, refusing any more. He could feed himself, but his trembling hands will spill soup everywhere. As I wait for him to loosen the muscles of his mouth and take the soup, which is now getting cold, I look at my reflection in his milky eyes. In there is a darker, smaller version of me. For a moment I wonder if I will grow into that which he became and shrivel into this which he now is. It is one day until the teenager who will become my mother gets married. She's excited, nervous. She paces around the small living room in the house she shares with her father and 2 younger siblings. Her older brothers have all left home. She got the whole week off from the bakery where she works, and because she has never had a holiday this long, she looks for things to do to fill the empty hours. Everything else has been taken care of. She has cleaned the house twice. She has ironed her father's clothes with a charcoal iron. The huge clay pot, half buried in the ground under the shade to make the water cool, has been filled. What makes her nervousness worse is that her father is also at home, unusual for him at this time of day. His first daughter is getting married, and he too has taken the day off. Relatives stop by every hour, and she entertains them and accepts their prayers, their advice, and at least from one of her aunts, gifts. At almost 19, she's not nearly the youngest bride in her community. She had been afraid of reaching the dreaded age of 20, still living with her father, while other 16 and 17-year-olds turn meal on a stove in the homes of their husbands. In her group of friends, she is the last to get married. The rest all had weddings over the past 2 years, and she was in all their bridal trains. More than this, however, she's excited at the prospect of no longer sharing these 2 rooms with her father and her 2 younger sisters, and feeling the occasional heavy descent of his wide, swarthy palm upon her back when he would return home and find her sleeping. Because a good daughter waits up to serve her father, even if she has just worked a 12-hour shift at the neighborhood bakery. Her mother had died of a bad kidney, and there was no submissive wife to lighten her load, to share the burden of his cursing and spitting and slapping. 2 of her closest friends' sisters, both in her bridal train, because her closest friends are all married and can't be in the bridal train, will arrive late to spend the night with her. The 25-year-old, who will become my father, arrives. He steps into the compound cautiously, afraid of his father-in-law. He needs to go over the final arrangements for the ceremony, to make sure the page boy and flower girl all have their outfits, to make sure there is enough food and meat and drinks for tomorrow, to make sure my mother will be on time and not like the other girls who keep the groom waiting for hours before they show up. Maybe I will keep you waiting, who knows, mother jokes. Maybe I never show up. He laughs and makes for the door. Till tomorrow, sir, he calls out to the other room where her father is. He grunts. She walks the man who will be her husband in the morning to the gate of the compound. After he has made a few proud strides, she steps out of the gate gently because she has no slippers on and calls out to him. Don't forget to bring an extra white shirt, she shouts, because too often she has seen and made fun of a groom who became too sweaty or stained his shirt with food at some point during the long ceremony. He walks back, his hand behind his ear, not sure what she has said. When he's close, she says it again. Oh, of course, he says, and then holds her hand. She lingers, and then, as if realizing she has transgressed, lets go and runs back into the house. As she parts the curtain to step into the living room, she feels a blow to her head. Reeling, she hears a gruff voice in the distance, echoing, "Are you a prostitute?" Her father towers over her body. "Why did you have to follow him out? Can't you wait until tomorrow? Do you want to disgrace me in this town? Well, I will disgrace you before you disgrace me." I am trying to be patient, especially when mother screams and hits and cries. I take deep breaths and remind myself that this will quickly be followed by the wildest stories about some neighbor or workmate or relative, and uproarious, teary laughter. It is impossible not to laugh when mother tells a story. Sometimes she is unable to complete the story because she is seized by long spells of belly laughs that stop her from speaking. This laughter makes me laugh, and then I am seized by the same spell that leaves the muscles of my stomach hurting for many hours. When they spend nights quarreling, I think of how badly matched my parents are. I wonder if the only reason why she agreed to marry my father was that she needed to get away from home, or that she was too afraid of being single at 20. Then, when I wake up and hear them laughing, I get upset that I spent all night worrying about this. Mother will not visit him in the hospital. His 3 oldest boys will not visit him. Grandfather does not talk about his sons or his daughters. He does not talk about anything he does not need to talk about. He tells me when he needs to get out of bed, when he needs help taking off or putting on his clothes. Last year, mother's oldest brother, Uncle Abraham, in a drunken rant, told me how much he disliked his father. He waved away his wife, Auntie Mariam, who was trying to make him stop. "Go and ask him to tell you about his first wife," he says when I tell him I'm about to go see my grandfather. He refuses to tell anyone about her, and now they have told us that he had a wife who cast a spell on his children to make sure we never succeed. I begged him to tell us who she is so that we can go and beg her, but he says over his dead body. I do not tell Uncle Abraham that I don't believe in magic spells and that it is not possible for some unknown woman from 50 years before to be responsible for how his life turned out. I ask him where he learned about this. Does it matter where I heard it? Look, this is the problem with your generation. You don't take these things seriously until it starts to affect you. You need to learn from us. I nod. I'm sorry, Uncle. I did not mean to cast doubt on your source. I'm only curious, really. Okay, he begins. Sado, your Uncle Sado, he was talking to a prophet at a retreat 2 years ago. And this man of God, who did not know him from Adam, told him that our father had a wife before our mother, and that he was married to both of them until he converted to Christianity and was told he could have only one wife. And then he just sent that woman away and chose to live with our mother. The woman was angry and then tied our destinies, particularly that of the male children, because of how our father treated her. So, Uncle, and please don't be angry with my questions, I'm only trying to understand the story. Did you confirm that this story was true? Look, you know our mother died when we were still small, so we couldn't ask her. But our father admitted this when we first asked him. He said, yes, there was another woman, but he will not tell us anything about her. We said, we didn't want to start anything, but we just want to find out where she is, if she's still alive, so we can plead with her to cancel her curse. And he said no. Of course he said no, because he is selfish. Always has been selfish. Always will be selfish. He hides behind that stupid church of his to say he won't do it. But really, it is all about his selfishness. I sigh. I have nothing to say in response. He hates the church that his father converted to and that my mother still belongs to. When he is not blaming his father, he blames the church for breaking up the family. I think about this woman who tied the destinies of my uncles. A part of me wants to ask grandfather about this woman. A part of me wants to know about this curse I do not believe in. Does the curse affect his male children only? Does it extend to his descendants? And does it matter if the male descendants come not from his sons, but from his daughter? I kill the thought and tell myself I'm being ridiculous. I decide to go back home and take a change of clothes and lie in my own bed for a bit. There is a nurse at the hospital taking care of him, and she tells me I can come back in the afternoon. Dad is at work, and only Mother is at home. I'm surprised she's not at work today. How is he? Mother asks, not looking at me. I try to catch her gaze, but she looks away. I have packed some food for you in the kitchen when you go back to the hospital. He is fine, I say, in response to the first question. How are you doing? I ask her, still trying to catch her eye. Fine, she says, and walks away into the kitchen. I know not to ask her why she is not at work today. I think about my non-answer as I peel off my clothes to take a shower. We say, I am fine, when we want to deflect. We say, fine, when a stranger does not deserve details about how we truly are. We say, fine, when we do not want to talk. And in this family, we do not want to talk a lot of the time. I think about the fact that my mother accepts my non-answer. We accept fine when we are not interested in a stranger. We accept fine as a response to how are you when we too want to deflect, when we feel we lack the strength or capacity to hold the real answer in our palms, and when we do not care. I wonder which it is with Mother. I do not believe that she does not care. I can see that she hasn't been sleeping well since I've had to spend time with grandfather at the hospital. Without fail, she has made sure he has all the food and care that he needs. But she will not go there herself, and she will not ask more than she needs to ask. Grandfather is not fine. Mother is not fine. I am not fine.
Hello, my name is Kondo. I am a poet and experimental filmmaker based in London, and I'm very happy to be here at the festival, and I'll be sharing 3 poems with you. I'd like to start by reading an excerpt which inspired the poem that I'm going to be reading. And the excerpt is about Rebecca Cox Jackson, who was a Shaker. And in 1859, Rebecca Cox Jackson, together with her partner Rebecca Perot, built a Shaker community for Black women, and they themselves were partners. And this excerpt that I'm going to read comes from Black Utopias by Jana Brown, which is an incredible book full of different ways and otherwise worlds, and I can really recommend this book. So, and this is what Rebecca Cox Jackson had written after dreaming about Rebecca Perot. And this was after Rebecca Cox Jackson had just met Rebecca Perot. So she writes, I stood, looking westward. On the beautiful river, I saw Rebecca Perot coming in the river, her face to the east, and she a-plunging in the water, every few steps, head foremost, a-bathing herself. She only had on her undergarment. She was pure and clean, even as the water in which she a-bathing. She came facing me out of the water. I wondered she was not afraid. Sometimes she would be hid for a moment, and then she would rise again. She looked like an angel. Oh, how bright. So, the poem that I wrote is Sistina, and the poem is titled Rebecca. Rebecca bathed herself in the river. She needed to feel her skin in water, the way it stroked her gently, never latching onto her, expecting her to be other. The water never asked her where she was from, where she was going, was she married. The water, like God, washed her regardless of whom her hands touched. She listened to the water whisper in her ear, sweet nothings, reflecting unimagined freedoms that swell the banks to fertile soil for flowers to grow. Healing lobelias to purge us of that which does not allow imagination to grow. Rebecca stretches her hands to reach deep down into the water. She fetches a memory of her lover, a plunging in the river as she was meant to be, a vision of such current flows through her body as her hands reach below, stroking the river to remember where she was going, to the grace where Rebecca lies, her sanctified mind reflecting. On seeing her lover rise out of the water, asking her where she was going, she was not afraid of the water, drowning all the seeds they planned to grow westwards. Reaching for her angelic face, Rebecca rooted her hands into her neck, draining her tissues of any tension, watching the droplets of water run down her navel. She said, "This angel shouldn't be worrying." This was what the bird's eye had been reflecting, what the harvest moon had been reflecting, visions to her, of all the futures that Rebecca and she were going to have. There are many futures, there are many futures. I have seen them. Facing eastwards, there will be space. Leave it in the hands of the sun to make us grow, like flower to fruit. This love was pure and clean like the water in which they both bathed their hands. Plucking at the fruit to burst in their hands. The milk from the cut sap, reflecting their holiness as white as their undergarments. Just her a plunging in the water. There was no telling for how long Rebecca was going to stay there admiring her. She would never grow tired of seeing her face, a bathing foremost. She did not need to be anywhere but here where God had wanted her to be, yearning to hold her with both her hands, as she did when they praised, as their throats birthed breath to grow into joyful shouts, breathing ecstatic gurgles of sound reflecting to the heavens. No one asked about what was going to happen when they were alone in the water. No one asked about the hands, for their throats could grow to sermon all to be. Thank you. So I don't usually write in form. I'm more, I don't know, forms are nice to know. And I guess, this was a fun thing to do. And the next poem that I'm going to share is also a sestina. And it's again about a black woman because I love black women. So, yeah. And this next one is on Alice Coltrane. And yeah, if you haven't heard of Alice Coltrane, then please go and bless yourself because it will change your life. If you know, you know. So I'm just going to jump into it right here. This poem is called Love. Alice, Alice, can you hear me in the dusty shelves of texts that do not hold your name, of the spirit, of a love supreme, ascension and meditations, where Alice built the cosmic door through the music manifesting on strings of devotion, the decentering of selfhood, the principle of devotion that jazz scholars could not hear, obsessing over individual genius as the door, way to having your name preserved in texts. Alice never uttered in meditations, yet every note carries her transcending spirit. For it is through her devotion that her spirit transcended the limitations of time, through her devotion to the collective worship, to the choral meditations, her insistence on peace, which we can hear played in the piano keys in love that transcends texts. There were hands that did reach and try to close the door on Alice, on her life, burning her skin, claiming her spirit. She defied what all the texts claimed to be true of a black mother in devotion. That was being called to hear, to sit face to face with herself in the meditations of absolute consciousness, of the melodic meditations that said she was free to walk out in through the door. This earth had no claim on her. Her freedom, here, was in Alice's spiritual devotion to the refusal of existing in the whitewashed texts that had exempted her ancestral preservation in texts. Instead, her ancestors' history lives in the melting of time meditations wherein she opened the infinite otherworldly door, where Swamini Turaya Santigitananda's spirit travels from astral plane to earth. Can you hear? Alice wrote about her devotion in texts that you can hear in her chanting meditations. If you look, the strings pull open a door for traversing through sound spirit. Thank you. Alice Coltrane. If anything that you get out of this set, please listen to Alice Coltrane. And as said, if you know, you know, and still go play Alice Coltrane. I'm already on my last poem. And this last poem, so the women that I'd spoken about are women in history, women who've done great, great things. But the next poem that I'm going to share is about a woman who is not my mother, but a woman who is like my mother, who raised me as well, who just stepped in and was there. And yeah, this poem is titled Kamene. Frozen meat is of no use frozen. She would dump it in a bucket, hide it from us all. In the sunlight, meat was thawing. We would not know the smell of blood and flesh. We would not know about the washing, cutting, dicing, skinning, pulling, bone cracking, all the rubbing of oil, garlic, chili, flakes, melting on the tip of our stretched out tongues. Smells that bound her hands as dinner was served. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to my poetry. My name is Kondo. Thank you to Lubi for organizing and for inviting me to the event and for being an incredible writer herself. Thank you to all the other writers, poets, storytellers, readers that shared with us today and whom I'm very lucky to be sharing, to be reading in this reading list with Sprachlos. Today the two poems that I shared at the beginning were inspired from this book, Black Utopias by Jana Brown. It's an incredible book. If you have the chance, go and get it. And what I am currently reading, or what's currently moving me, is Inheritance by Taylor Johnson, another very, very, very incredible collection. And of course I have a whole list of other books here. Wild Peach by Sean Henry Smith, incredible book. And if you want to connect with me, you can do so on Instagram. I'm there as How to Grow a Flower. And it's really good to be part of a reading group where we can read in all the languages that we speak. Today I chose to share my poetry in English, but I also speak German and Swahili, and sometimes I speak all three in one go. Sometimes I share poetry that has all three languages, but I didn't do that today. But just thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you. I hope that the days ahead are all gentle and kind to you. Thank you.